It all begins in a hospital hallway. A millionaire in a sharp suit holds his mistress tightly, while just a few steps away, his pregnant wife writhes in labor pains before collapsing to the floor. The cameras capture everything. The whole world watches as power, betrayal, and deceit collide under the cold hospital lights. But what he doesn't know is that the moment she falls is the moment his downfall begins. What follows is a storm of truth, exposure, and justice that no amount of money can silence. Stay with us, because this story will send chills down your spine. Tell us what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Under the pale light of the maternity wing, everything looked too clean, too calm for what was about to break. The hall of St. Helena Hospital smelled of antiseptic and lavender from a nearby diffuser, an odd mix that tried to hide the sharp scent of fear. Nurses moved quickly, their shoes squeaking softly on the polished floor. The air hummed with machines, heart monitors, and the faint echo of a lullaby from another room. Aurora Blake lay on a white bee gurney, her breathing uneven, her hands clutching the thin blanket that covered her swollen belly. The contraction came fast, cutting through her body like lightning, and her voice trembled when she whispered, "It's starting." A nurse leaned close. "You're doing great, Mrs. Blake. We're almost there." The wheels of the gurney squealed as they turned the corner toward the delivery suite. The light grew brighter, the noise sharper. Every movement in the corridor felt magnified. Aurora tried to focus on the ceiling lights flashing above her like silent beacons. 1, 2, 3, and then she saw him. Damien Rook stood at the end of the corridor, her husband, the man she had once believed would hold her hand through this moment. His tailored suit looked out of place amid the scrubs and white coats, his expression carved from stone. For a second, relief touched her face. But before she could call his name, she noticed the woman beside him, Iris Vale, his assistant. Her red blouse stood out like a wound in the sterile hallway. Aurora's eyes widened as she watched Iris step closer, touching Damien's arm, whispering something that made his lips curl in a faint smile. Then it happened. He reached for Iris and pulled her into his arms. The moment slowed. The nurses stopped pushing for half a second, sensing something shift in the air. Aurora's breath caught. The sound of the monitor beside her grew louder, faster. She could not hear what they were saying, but she could see the shape of Iris's face pressed against his chest, her hand resting where Aurora's used to be. Damien's head tilted slightly down, close enough to her ear that only the two of them could share whatever cruel secret passed between them. The sight felt unreal, like glass shattering in silence. Aurora's hand slipped from the rail of the gurney. "Damien?" The name came out like a breath, more pain than sound. The nurse nearest her looked up, following her gaze. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir, please step aside," the nurse called. But Damien didn't move. He kept his arm around Iris as if nothing else existed. Aurora tried to lift herself, but the effort tore through her body. A sharp pain tightened across her stomach. She gasped. The machine beside her shrieked a long warning tone. Her fingers searched blindly for something to hold onto, but the blanket was all she found. The hallway filled with noise. "We need to move her now," another nurse shouted. Two orderlies rushed in, pushing the gurney toward the double doors. Aurora's vision blurred, her mind flashing between the fluorescent lights and the image of her husband holding another woman. She wanted to ask why, wanted to scream, but her throat refused to form words. H contractions stole her breath. Each heartbeat sounded farther away. As the gurney rolled past them, Aurora's eyes met Damien's. For a heartbeat, he looked startled, caught between guilt and denial. Iris stepped back, but his hand lingered on her arm. That small gesture crushed whatever remained inside Aurora. The pain in her abdomen turned white-hot. Her heartbeat raced in her ears. She whispered, "Please, not now," though she wasn't sure if she was begging her body or her heart. The monitor beeped faster, frantic. A nurse pressed her palm against Aurora's shoulder. "Stay with us, Mrs. Blake." But Aurora's world had already started to dim. The colors drained, replaced by the sterile blue of hospital lights. Somewhere, someone shouted for Dr. Quinn. Another voice ordered, "Get the oxygen now." The sounds blended into one long, trembling wave. From the corner of the corridor, a red light blinked above the security camera. Its lens caught everything: the sterile hall, the uniformed staff rushing, the billionaire husband frozen in place, the assistant stepping back, the pregnant woman collapsing on the gurney. The reflection of that red light flickered across the chrome handles of the doors as they swung open. Aurora tried to speak again, but the words dissolved into air. Her body felt weightless, drifting. Her vision narrowed to a single image, the faint glow of the hospital ceiling merging with the memory of Damien's arm around another woman. The sound of her own heartbeat mixed with the hum of machines until she could no longer tell them apart. A tear rolled down her temple, disappearing into her hair. The last thing she felt was the cold edge of the oxygen mask pressing against her skin. The nurses pushed the gurney into the delivery room. "She's losing consciousness!" someone shouted. Another voice answered, fetal heart rate dropping. The machines screamed again, piercing and metallic. The walls of the room pulsed with light from the monitors, each flash marking the shrinking rhythm of 2 lives hanging by a thread. "Doctor," Mara Quinn burst in, pulling on gloves, her voice sharp and steady. "Everyone focus, we're not losing them today." Outside the room, Damien finally moved. He took 1 step forward, but a nurse blocked his way. "You need to wait here." Iris touched his sleeve. "Damien, maybe we should go." He shook his head, but his eyes stayed fixed on the closed doors, on the camera light glowing above them. His jaw clenched. "She'll be fine," he muttered, though the words rang hollow. Inside, Dr. Quinn's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay with me, Aurora." But Aurora couldn't hear. Her world was a tunnel of faint beeps fading into distance. One of her hands slipped over the edge of the gurney, the hospital bracelet still hanging loosely from her wrist, its white tag swinging back and forth. It struck the metal rail once, softly, like a ticking clock. The machines blared again, louder. Then silence fell. In the quiet that followed, only one sound remained, the constant blink of the camera light, recording, patient and unblinking. It watched the frozen scene of chaos, the doctors bent over the bed, the husband outside frozen in guilt, the red reflection dancing across the sterile floor. And above it all, the silent truth that the camera never looked away. The delivery room was filled with motion, a storm of white coats and silver instruments under blinding light. The machines screamed in fast, uneven beeps that seemed to pulse with fear itself. Mara Quinn stood at the center, gloved hands steady, her expression tight with focus. "We're losing both heartbeats," she said sharply. "Oxygen ready. I want surgical prep now." Her voice cut through the noise like a scalpel. The nurses moved faster. One adjusted the monitor. Another rolled a tray closer. The air carried the metallic scent of sterilizer and sweat. The world outside the sterile circle of light no longer existed. Aurora Blake lay unconscious on the operating table, her head tilted slightly to one side. Her skin was ghost pale, glistening with moisture. The oxygen mask fogged with each fragile breath. The steady rhythm of life she had carried for 9 months had faltered into chaos. The fetal monitor wailed again, its high pitch slicing the air. Dr. Quinn didn't flinch. "We're going in. Now." A nurse counted under her breath, her voice trembling as she read the blood pressure. 70/40. She's fading. Another replied, "Scalpel ready." The metallic click echoed like thunder. Dr. Quinn looked once more at the screen that displayed 2 flickering lines, one flat, one erratic. "Let's move," she said. The overhead lights seemed to narrow, focusing on the table. Everything else fell away. Hands worked in practiced choreography. The sterile drape lifted, the instruments gleamed. Aurora's body didn't move, only the faint trembling of her chest under the respirator. Sweat ran down Dr. Quinn's temple, caught under her mask. "Hold suction. Keep the field clean. We're almost there." Outside the room, the corridor had gone silent. Damien Rook stood just beyond the double doors, the sterile glass separating him from the chaos inside. The reflection of his own face blurred against the bright light of the operating room. He could see movement, flashes of metal, the outlines of gloved hands. Iris Vale stood behind him, frozen, her red blouse a harsh color against the pale walls. She whispered, "Damien, what's happening?" He didn't answer, his jaw clenched until the muscles trembled. Inside, a voice shouted something he couldn't make out. Dr. Quinn's tone rose, steady but urgent. "Clamp here, gentle. Come on, little one." The suction machine hissed, the rhythmic noise of labor replaced by mechanical breathing. For a heartbeat, the room was suspended in silence. Then came a sound so faint it might have been imagined, a tiny gasp. One of the nurses froze, eyes wide. "Doctor, we have air movement!" Dr. Quinn's hands didn't stop. "Clear the airway, quickly, let me hear him." The nurse used a bulb syringe, clearing the newborn's mouth and nose. For a second, nothing. Then a cry, weak but real, filled the air. The sound was thin, raw, almost uncertain, but it was life. A collective breath swept through the room. Someone said softly, "We have him." Dr. Quinn looked up, her eyes shining with something fierce and restrained. "Keep him warm. Transfer to neonatal now. Monitor saturation and pulse." The nurse wrapped the baby in a sterile cloth, her hands shaking. The infant's tiny chest rose and fell with uneven rhythm, but he was breathing. The monitor beeped softly, slower, steadier. In the hallway, Damien heard the muffled cry through the door. His body stiffened. Iris touched his arm lightly. "That's him, isn't it?" He didn't answer. His face turned toward the sound, but his eyes stayed cold, unreadable. The nurse pushing past them didn't meet his gaze. She carried the small bundle down the hall toward the neonatal unit, her voice barely audible as she called, "Make room, NICU, male infant, premature distress, stabilized." Back in the room, Dr. Quinn's focus shifted instantly to Aurora. Heart rhythm still irregular. "Come on, stay with me." She pressed her stethoscope to the woman's chest, listening to the faint flutter beneath. "I need fluids." Now, the nurse adjusted the IV line. The monitor beeped weakly, uncertain. Aurora didn't stir. Her lips were slightly parted, her lashes still. The oxygen mask clouded with shallow breaths. The newborn's faint cries echoed from the corridor, fading as the door closed behind the nurse. Dr. Quinn's shoulders dropped for half a second before straightening again. "She did it," she murmured. "Now we have to keep her here." The staff worked silently, their motions synchronized, measured by experience and fear. The metallic hum of the ventilator was the only rhythm left. A single bead of blood ran down the edge of the table, falling soundlessly onto the white tile below. The sound of a monitor stuttered once, then steadied. The faint mechanical sigh of the respirator filled the room again. A nurse whispered, "She's holding." Dr. Quinn nodded. "Maintain oxygen flow at this rate. Keep her temperature stable." For a moment, everything paused. The overhead light buzzed softly. The nurses stepped back, waiting for instruction. Dr. Quinn pulled off one glove and pressed her hand gently against Aurora's wrist. The pulse was there, faint but present. "She's still with us," she said quietly. Relief rippled through the room like a breath. Then came the sound that had been there all along, unnoticed until now. The steady blink of a red light above the door. Dr. Quinn lifted her gaze. The small security camera sat in the corner, unblinking, recording every second. Its light reflected faintly on the metal cabinet beside it. It had watched everything, the panic, the blood, the cry of new life. She stared at it for a long moment, the corners of her eyes tight with exhaustion. "Leave it on," she said softly to the nurse adjusting the equipment. "Let it record everything." No one replied, but everyone heard. Aurora lay still, her face calm beneath the oxygen mask. The faint rhythmic beeping filled the silence, slow and steady. Dr. Quinn adjusted the blanket over her chest and looked once more toward the corner of the room. The red light continued its patient pulse, glowing against the sterile walls. In the corridor, footsteps passed, fading quickly. Somewhere down the hall, the newborn cried again, faint but stronger now. The sound barely reached the delivery room, a fragile echo that hung in the air. Dr. Quinn exhaled, her hands finally still. "He's alive," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Now let's make sure she is too." The nurse beside her nodded and checked the monitor again. The green line flickered, then settled into a weak but steady rhythm. The oxygen machine hummed softly, the same quiet hum that had filled 1,000 other rooms like this. The red camera light blinked once more, steady and indifferent, capturing the moment where two lives balanced between loss and survival. The sound of that faint cry from the hall mixed with the beeping inside the room until they became one fragile song, the anthem of a night that refused to end. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of Rook Biotech's headquarters, turning the marble floors gold. The building was quiet, almost reverent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Reporters gathered in the lobby, their voices hushed but eager, cameras glinting like rows of sharp eyes. A large banner hung behind the podium at the front of the room. Rook Biotech, commitment to family and innovation. Damien Rook stepped forward in a charcoal suit that fit like armor. His face was composed, the expression of a man who believed he could control any narrative. "Good morning," he began. His voice carried through the room, calm and rehearsed. "I want to thank everyone for your concern. My wife and our newborn son are both in stable condition. It was a difficult night, but they're receiving excellent care. I ask for privacy for my family during this time." Flashes burst from cameras. A reporter called out, "Mr. Rook, there are claims circulating about an incident at St. Helena Hospital. Are those true?" Damien's smile didn't waver. "There were misunderstandings," he replied. "Stressful circumstances can be easily misinterpreted. What matters is that my wife and child are safe. We're grateful." Beside him, Iris Vale stood slightly behind, wearing a black dress and an expression of carefully measured sympathy. She looked down often, pretending discomfort under the lights. When another reporter asked who she was, Damien answered without hesitation, "My assistant. She's been helping manage communications during this difficult period." Iris lowered her gaze, playing her role perfectly. The crowd murmured. Some nodded, satisfied by the confidence in his tone. Others glanced at their phones, scrolling through unconfirmed whispers. The rumor was already spreading online that something had happened outside the delivery room, something no one wanted to name yet. Damien adjusted his tie, signaling the end of questions. "My family appreciates your respect," he said before stepping away from the podium. Security ushered the crowd out. In the hallway beyond the press room, the smile on his face vanished. He turned to Iris, voice low and sharp. "Damage control, full sweep. Any footage from the hospital gets buried." Iris nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I've already spoken with their PR department. They'll deny everything." Damien looked at her, his expression cold. "Make sure they do." He walked toward the elevator without another word. At St. Helena Hospital, the world looked very different. The maternity floor was quiet, the hum of machines soft against the sterile air. Behind closed doors, Aurora Blake lay still beneath white sheets, her body fragile but breathing. A soft, rhythmic beep marked her pulse. The oxygen mask covered most of her face, her hair damp against the pillow. A faint trace of pink warmed her cheeks, but her eyelids did not move. The room smelled of antiseptic and something faintly sweet, the kind of scent that always lingered where new life began. Dr. Mara Quinn stood near the window, reviewing charts. She had barely slept since the operation. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke to the nurse at her side. "She's holding. Blood pressure is improving. Keep her on low-flow oxygen. And check the incision again in 2 hours." The nurse nodded, making notes. "The baby?" Mara asked quietly. "He's still in neonatal stable," the nurse replied. "Breathing on his own now." Across the hall, in the hospital's small security office, Linda Frost sat in front of a monitor that displayed 4 camera feeds. She was the youngest nurse on the floor, still new enough to be afraid of breaking rules, but old enough to know when rules had already been broken. The video feed in the upper right corner showed a frozen frame from the night before, the moment in the hallway when Damien Rook had wrapped his arms around Iris Vale. The timestamp glowed in white letters, the image sharp and clear. She hesitated, glancing at the closed door behind her. Her heart beat faster. She'd heard whispers that morning that someone from Rook Biotech had contacted the hospital director, demanding all footage be deleted. The thought made her stomach twist. She pressed the play button once more, watching the few seconds unfold again. The pregnant woman on the gurney, the man in the suit, the other woman leaning into him. Then the collapse. The soundless image burned itself into her mind. Linda reached into the drawer and pulled out a small silver USB drive. Her hands trembled as she slid it into the console. The progress bar appeared on the screen, copying 30%, 50, 90. The soft hum of the machine filled the silence. She turned at the sound of footsteps in the hall and quickly minimized the window. A man in a hospital uniform passed by, glancing in but not entering. She waited until he was gone before ejecting the USB and slipping it into her pocket. Her reflection in the dark monitor looked pale, almost translucent. She swallowed hard. If they find out, I'll lose my job, she thought. But another voice in her head answered, if you don't, she could lose everything. Down the corridor, Dr. Mara Quinn entered the room of the hospital director. The man behind the desk looked tense, a folded letter on the table in front of him. You've received a request from Rook Biotech, she said flatly. They want the surveillance wiped. He didn't answer immediately. Dr. Quinn, this hospital depends on corporate funding. We can't, she cut him off. We can't delete evidence. That's what we can't do. Her voice stayed calm but left no space for argument. If that footage disappears, it won't be Rook's scandal. It'll be ours. The director sighed, rubbing his temples. You understand how powerful he is. Mara nodded. And you understand what's at stake. She turned toward the door. I'm keeping that footage under medical review until Mrs. Blake regains consciousness. She deserves to know what happened to her. As she left, Linda waited by the nurse's station, clutching a stack of files to hide the USB in her hand. Dr. Quinn stopped beside her. You've been on rotation since last night, haven't you? Linda nodded. Yes, doctor. Mara's gaze softened slightly. Then you've seen enough to understand why we can't stay quiet. Linda hesitated, then whispered, I made a backup, just in case. Mara studied her for a moment, then gave a single nod. Keep it safe, she said. The hallway seemed impossibly still. Through the glass walls, the morning sun filtered in, catching the glint of the red recording light above Aurora's door. It blinked slowly, steady as a heartbeat. In the room beyond, Aurora slept on, her hand resting near the edge of the blanket. The bracelet on her wrist read, A. Blake, Maternity Ward. Linda looked up at the red light, her pulse racing. She slipped the USB deeper into her pocket, feeling its hard shape press against her palm. The quiet of the hospital pressed down on her like a weight. She didn't know what would happen next, only that the truth was now hers to carry. The light above the door blinked again, unblinking in its patience, and the sound of the monitor in Aurora's room continued its slow, fragile rhythm. The video appeared online just after sunrise. No one knew who uploaded it first. It had no caption at the beginning, only a hospital hallway drenched in sterile light. Then the moment unfolded in quiet horror. A man in a dark suit wrapped his arms around a woman in red while a nurse's cry echoed faintly off-screen. In the background, a pregnant woman on a gurney reached out, her hand trembling before she collapsed. The frame froze for a second on the face of the man turning toward her, Damien Rook. The words appeared across the bottom of the screen. Millionaire hugs mistress while wife collapses in labor. Within an hour, the clip spread through every platform. By noon, it had reached 5 million views. The comment sections exploded. Some people replayed the few seconds again and again, looking for excuses. Others saw only cruelty. He didn't even move when she fell, one wrote. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice, said another. Hashtags began to rise like wildfire. Number hospital hug, number Aurora Blake, number Rook Biotech scandal. The first news alert broke on the morning feed of a national network. The anchor's voice was calm, but the footage behind her told a different story. Sources confirm the woman in the video is Aurora Blake, wife of pharmaceutical magnate Damien Rook. Mrs. Blake remains hospitalized following an emergency delivery at St. Helena. The clip played again, slowed to half speed. The room went silent as millions watched the red light of the hospital camera blink, recording every cruel second. At Rook Biotech's headquarters, Damien's office door slammed shut. The blinds were drawn, muting the city's noise. Iris Vale stood near the desk, her phone vibrating non-stop in her hand. It's everywhere, she whispered. They're calling it the most heartless thing they've ever seen. Damien didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the television across the room, where his own image looped endlessly. He saw himself standing there, detached, unmoved, as the woman who carried his child collapsed. He finally spoke, voice low and controlled. Who leaked it? Iris hesitated. We don't know. The hospital security feed was encrypted. Someone inside must have… He cut her off. Then find them. Pay them if you have to. Silence them if you can't. His reflection in the glass wall looked older than it had the day before. He turned away from the screen and poured a drink with shaking hands. The glass clinked against the bottle. "It's not supposed to look like that," he said. "It was a misunderstanding. She'll wake up and confirm it." Iris's reply came quietly. "If she wakes up." The words hung in the air. Damien's jaw tightened. "She will," he said, but there was no conviction in his tone. The television continued to play the clip, the sound now muted but still looping in the background. Across the city, in a crowded newsroom, journalist Rachel Keene sat at her desk, surrounded by monitors. Her editor leaned over her shoulder. "That's the angle," he said. "The hug, the collapse. It's clean, it's brutal, and it's true." Rachel frowned. "It's more than a headline," she said. "It's evidence." She played the clip again, freezing the frame on the moment Aurora's hand slipped from the gurney. The hospital's fluorescent light reflected in her eyes. "This isn't just scandal," Rachel murmured. "It's humanity failing on camera." Within minutes, her article went live. One hug, one collapse, and the world finally sees. It described the timeline, the hospital, the silence from Rook Biotech, and the lingering question: what kind of man turns away when his wife falls? The story spread faster than any corporate press release could counter. By afternoon, television screens across the city showed the same footage in an endless loop. In the hospital cafeteria, nurses paused to watch. Patients whispered in hallways. In a quiet corner of the neonatal ward, a nurse adjusting the monitor over a sleeping newborn glanced at the screen and bit her lip. "He's her husband," she said softly to another nurse. "Imagine seeing that." In Aurora's room, Dr. Mara Quinn stood by the window. The blinds were half closed, sunlight cutting through in pale strips. She heard the muted sound of the television from the hallway. "Turn it off," she said to the orderly standing near the door. He nodded quickly, switching the channel. But the silence that followed was heavier. She looked at the woman lying motionless on the bed. "They finally know," she whispered. On the floor below, the hospital lobby was flooded with reporters and camera crews. Security guards tried to hold them back, but microphones stretched through the glass doors. "Do you have a statement from Dr. Quinn? Has the hospital confirmed the footage? Is Mrs. Blake conscious?" The questions overlapped, rising in volume. The red light of countless camera lenses blinked like warning signals. In a conference room upstairs, the hospital director paced behind a table, his tie loosened, his voice strained. "We need to respond," he said. "Rook Biotech funds half our research. If we confirm the footage, we lose them." Dr. Mara's voice cut through sharply. "If we deny it, we lose our integrity." The room fell silent. She set a folder on the table, the hospital's ethical code printed across the cover. "The truth is already out there. Pretending otherwise won't save anyone." The director rubbed his eyes. "You realize this will destroy him." Mara's tone didn't change. He destroyed himself the moment he forgot she could see. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, the glass facade of Rook Biotech reflected a wall of flashing cameras. Protesters had gathered outside, holding signs that read, "Respect mothers, justice for Aurora." The sound of chanting echoed against the marble entrance. Damien watched from the window on the top floor. His phone buzzed again. Another alert. Another headline. He ignored it, staring down at the crowd. His reflection in the glass merged with theirs, his face ghosted by the city's glow. Inside the hospital, the news broadcast continued in the background as night fell. Rachel Keene's voice narrated over the footage. "A single act of indifference can change everything." What the camera caught was not an accident but a revelation. The image slowed once more, showing Damien's unmoving figure as Aurora collapsed. In his office, Damien hurled the remote across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, leaving a dark crack in the plaster. The television screen flickered once and then steadied, replaying the moment again. He sank into his chair, staring at the frozen image of himself. "Turn it off," he muttered to no one, but the video continued, unstoppable. The final seconds of the clip showed the hallway empty after the chaos. Only the red light above the camera remained, blinking steadily. The quiet pulse of that light filled the screen before the video ended. Across millions of devices, in living rooms, offices, and hospitals, the same red glow lingered for a breath before fading to black. And in that silence, the world had already decided what it had seen. The hallway outside Aurora Blake's room was silent except for the steady hum of the fluorescent lights. Security officers stood on either side of the door, their uniforms crisp, their expressions tense. The chaos of the outside world had reached the hospital that morning, spilling in through every phone screen and whispered conversation. Now the quiet felt unnatural, as if everyone were holding their breath. Inside, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor kept time with the faint rise and fall of Aurora's chest. The room was cool, the blinds half drawn, sunlight pooling weakly across the floor. Dr. Mara Quinn reviewed the vitals at the foot of the bed. Her tone was firm but calm when she spoke to the nurse beside her. "She's stable for now. Keep oxygen low and fluids steady. No visitors without clearance." The nurse nodded. "What about the husband?" Mara's jaw tightened. "Especially him." Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Helen Blake, her silver hair pinned neatly back, walked toward the room, carrying a small bag of fresh clothes. Her face was composed, but her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. One of the guards stepped forward politely. "Mrs. Blake," we were told. Helen lifted her hospital pass. "I'm her mother." Her voice was soft but carried authority. The guard hesitated, then opened the door for her. Inside, Helen set the bag down on a chair and moved closer to the bed. Her daughter looked impossibly small against the white sheets, her skin pale but warm to the touch. Helen reached out, smoothing a stray strand of hair from Aurora's forehead. "My darling girl," she whispered. "You've been through enough." Dr. Quinn looked up from her chart. "Mrs. Blake, we're keeping her under close observation. She's responding well, but we can't risk any emotional shocks." Helen nodded slowly. "Then keep him away." The words came out like steel, quiet but unbreakable. As if summoned by the thought, the sound of heavy footsteps approached from the hallway. Damien Rook's voice cut through the stillness. "I have every right to see my wife." The guards stiffened. Helen turned toward the door as it opened. Damien stood there in a dark coat, his eyes shadowed, his face drawn tight with exhaustion. The room seemed to shrink around him. "Mr. Rook," Dr. Quinn said evenly, stepping between him and the bed, "you were instructed not to enter this ward without permission." Damien's tone was clipped. "Permission? She's my wife. That's all the permission I need." Helen rose to her feet. "You lost that right when you humiliated her in front of the world." The words hit like a slap, but Damien didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the woman lying motionless on the bed. "She's alive, isn't she?" His voice trembled slightly, betraying something between guilt and pride. "Then you should thank me for paying for the best care possible." Dr. Quinn's eyes narrowed. "Money doesn't heal betrayal, Mr. Rook, and in this room, my authority is medical, not financial. You can wait outside." He took a step forward, ignoring her. One of the security guards moved instantly to block his path. "Sir, please." Damien's jaw clenched. "You think I'm the villain here? You people believe everything you see on a screen. That video doesn't tell the whole story." Helen's voice was low but sharp. "The whole story is lying right there." The tension thickened until it filled every corner of the room. Dr. Quinn's tone remained calm but final. "Step back, Mr. Rook. If you continue to interfere, I'll call the police." For a long second, he didn't move. His reflection in the glass window stared back at him, pale and distorted. He looked at Aurora again, her still face, her slow breathing. The faint trace of a tear dried near her temple. His lips parted as if to say something, but nothing came. Then, without a word, he turned away. As the door closed behind him, the room exhaled. Dr. Quinn motioned to the guard, "Make sure he doesn't come back." The man nodded and took position outside. Helen sank back into the chair beside the bed. She picked up her daughter's hand, tracing her fingers gently. The hospital bracelet clinked softly against the metal rail of the bed. "When you wake up," she murmured, "I promise he won't be here." Dr. Quinn adjusted the IV line, her expression thoughtful. "She's stronger than she looks. I've seen women come back from worse when they had something to fight for." Helen's eyes glistened. "She already has something, her son." The nurse re-entered quietly, carrying a folded blanket. As she placed it on the side table, something small fell to the floor, the white plastic wristband from the night of the birth. Helen bent to pick it up. The tag read A. Blake, Maternity Ward. She held it in her palm for a long moment, then set it gently beside the bed. The light from the window caught the smooth surface, making it gleam faintly. Outside, Damien paced the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear. "I just need control of the story," he said harshly. Tell them the hospital is exaggerating. Tell them she's recovering. The sooner this blows over, the sooner I can fix it. His publicist's voice crackled on the line, hesitant. Sir, it's too late. The footage is everywhere. People are calling for your resignation. Damien's fist tightened around the phone. Then they can wait. He stopped near the glass wall and glanced inside. Through the narrow gap in the blinds, he saw Helen sitting beside Aurora, her head bowed, her hands still holding her daughter's. Behind them, the steady red light of the security camera glowed faintly in the corner, reflected in the window. The sight of it made his throat tighten. It was the same light that had watched him that night. Inside, Dr. Quinn noticed him watching. She walked to the window, drew the blinds closed, and turned away. The movement was small but final, shutting him out completely. The hallway lights flickered as Damien walked toward the elevator, his footsteps heavy on the tile. The echo followed him long after he was gone. Back inside, the machines hummed quietly. Helen leaned closer to her daughter and whispered, "You're not alone, my love." Dr. Quinn placed a reassuring hand on the older woman's shoulder. "We'll keep her safe." The faint rhythm of the monitor filled the silence again. The bracelet beside the bed caught the light one last time before the shadow of the closing blinds fell over it. On the other side of the door, the red camera light blinked once, its reflection fading from the glass. For a moment, everything was still. The soft sound of air through the oxygen tube, the steady beeping, the mother's quiet breathing beside her child. Then the guard's voice came softly through the intercom. "Doctor, the husband has left the floor." "Doctor," Quinn nodded without looking up. "Good," she said. She glanced at the patient, at the faint movement of her chest rising and falling. "Let's keep it that way." The words settled into the quiet like a promise. The hum of the machines continued, unbroken, patient. In that stillness, the red light outside blinked again, silent and watchful, as if recording the vow itself. The world woke to the sound of headlines. Every screen, every phone, every morning program carried the same image. A tiny newborn boy in a glass incubator, a white tag on his wrist reading Baby Blake. The caption beneath it read, "He survived when his mother collapsed." The story had shifted. It was no longer about the scandal of a husband's betrayal, but the miracle of a child who refused to die. On television, soft piano music played under the footage. The anchor spoke with practiced sympathy. The nation has rallied behind the infant son of Aurora Blake, the woman seen in the viral hospital video. While his mother remains unconscious, donations and messages of support have poured in from around the world. The camera cut to the sidewalk outside Street Helena Hospital. Flowers covered the stairs like a blanket of color. Handmade cards read for Aurora and for the baby who fought to live. A reporter spoke over the sound of traffic. This story has touched hearts across the country. The public now calls him Baby Theo, after the Greek word for gift. The image of the tiny baby breathing beneath the soft light of the incubator appeared again, his fragile chest rising and falling with perfect rhythm. In the neonatal ward, the air was thick with quiet awe. Nurses moved carefully between the rows of machines, their steps light. Linda Frost stood at the edge of the room, watching the smallest patient she had ever cared for. The newborn's skin was pale pink, his hands curled into fists the size of her thumb. "He's strong," whispered another nurse. "Look at that! He's already fighting!" Linda smiled faintly, just like his mother. Behind the glass wall, a camera crew filmed from the corridor. The hospital had reluctantly agreed to let one network capture footage for a feature called Miracle at Street Helena. Dr. Mara Quinn, though reluctant, had approved it on one condition: no faces, no details of the mother's condition. The footage would focus on the child alone. Downstairs, in the lobby, the press gathered again. This time their tone was different. A sense of reverence had replaced scandal. Rachel Keene, her notebook in hand, spoke quietly into her phone. "People don't just want gossip anymore. They want redemption. They want hope." Her editor's voice crackled on the other end. "Give them both." Rachel looked up at the banner of flowers by the entrance. Maybe they already found it. Across the city, in Damien Rook's penthouse, the mood was far from peaceful. He stood in front of the television, his face pale under the morning light. The news played again, showing the incubator and the sea of flowers. "Public sympathy for the Blake family continues to grow," said the anchor. Meanwhile, Sources confirm that Rook Biotech has suspended Damien Rook as CEO, pending internal review. Damien turned off the television with a sharp motion. The screen went black, reflecting his silhouette. Iris Vale stood near the window, scrolling through her phone. "They're turning you into the villain," she said quietly. "They've already renamed him. Baby Theo, the miracle boy. They love him." Damien's voice was flat. "And they hate me." Iris hesitated, then nodded. "They're calling for a boycott. Your investors are panicking. If this continues, the board will..." "Will what?" he snapped. "They'll do what cowards always do. Protect their image." He paced the floor, hands clenched. "It's not enough that she's lying there. They have to crucify me too." Iris lowered her eyes. "It's not about her anymore. It's about the child." He stopped. The words seemed to echo in the still air. "The child," he repeated softly. His jaw tightened. "They think he's a symbol. They think he's pure. But he's just another headline." His reflection in the window looked warped, bent by the city's glare. "Let them worship him," he muttered. "It won't last." Back at the hospital, the shift change brought new faces. The security team rotated. A small group of volunteers arrived to manage the flood of gifts. Dr. Quinn walked through the lobby, clipboard in hand, acknowledging the reporters only with a nod. One of them called out, "Doctor, how is Mrs. Blake?" She didn't stop walking. "Alive," she said simply, "and that's enough for now." Upstairs, Helen Blake sat beside her daughter's bed. A vase of white lilies stood on the windowsill. The television on the wall played softly, showing the newborn in the incubator again. Helen's eyes filled with tears. "He's beautiful," she whispered. She turned to Dr. Quinn, who had just entered. "They say the world is praying for him." Dr. Quinn checked the monitors. "Maybe those prayers are keeping her here." Helen smiled faintly. "He's her reason." "Doctor." Quinn didn't answer. She adjusted the oxygen line, her expression focused but gentle. The faint sound of the television continued behind her. The reporter was saying something about the online campaign number Baby Theo Strong that had already raised thousands for neonatal research. In the neonatal unit, Linda walked quietly to the incubator. She placed a small stuffed bear beside the baby's blanket, careful not to disturb the wires. "You've got an army of strangers cheering for you," she whispered. "But I think your mom's the one you're waiting for." The baby stirred slightly, a tiny movement that made her smile. Downstairs, a large crowd had gathered outside the hospital gates. Some held candles, others simply stood in silence. The camera crews captured every face, every tear, every soft chant of "Stay strong, Aurora." The sound floated up through the open windows, reaching the upper floors as a faint hum of compassion. Inside, the staff paused to listen. For a moment, even the machines seemed quieter. The faint light from the hallway spilled into Aurora's room, brushing against her pale skin. The monitor beside her bed flickered once. Helen looked up sharply. The green line had jumped slightly, then steadied again. Dr. Quinn leaned closer. "A good sign," she murmured. "Her vitals are responding to external stimuli." Helen gripped her daughter's hand. "Do you hear them, sweetheart? They're waiting for you." The quiet deepened. The only sound was the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator and the soft beep of the heart monitor. The sunlight shifted across the floor, touching the bracelet on Aurora's wrist. The letters of her name glowed faintly under the light. In another room, Rachel Keene typed the closing lines of her article. Sometimes, redemption arrives in the smallest form. In a single heartbeat, the world remembers what kindness feels like. She paused, listening to the newsroom's buzz. "We're running it front page," her editor called. "Title?" Rachel looked at the image on her screen. The infant's hand curled around a nurse's finger. She typed, "The hug that broke a marriage, the cry that healed a world." By late afternoon, the hospital lobby overflowed with flowers again. The security team cleared a path through the crowd. The walls smelled of lilies and antiseptic. Dr. Quinn stood at the top of the stairs, watching the quiet sea of people. Behind her, Helen remained by Aurora's side, whispering softly. The monitor beeped again, steady and calm. In the neonatal ward, baby Theo stirred once more. His tiny fingers reached toward the light filtering through the glass. The nurses watched in silence. The smallest sound escaped his lips, soft but determined. Outside, as the evening settled, the candlelight flickered across the hospital walls, reflected faintly on the glass of the maternity wing. Inside, the red recording light above Aurora's door blinked slowly, the same unbroken pulse that had seen everything. The air held its breath, waiting. Morning light poured gently through the blinds, soft and golden, spilling across the white sheets of the recovery room. The hum of machines was steady, their rhythm calm for the first time in days. The scent of antiseptic mixed faintly with the sweetness of lilies that filled the corner vase. Dr. Mara Quinn stood by the window, her coffee untouched, eyes on the monitors that blinked in quiet precision. Every line, every number, was a silent prayer. Aurora Blake had not moved since the night she collapsed, but something in the air felt different. Her color was warmer, her breathing evened out, steady and strong. Mara stepped closer, resting her hand lightly on the railing of the bed. "Your vitals are stable, Aurora," she whispered. "If you can hear me, your body is fighting its way back." In the hallway, Helen Blake walked quietly with a small bundle of folded baby clothes in her arms. The sound of her shoes against the floor was soft, almost reverent. She paused before entering, glancing through the narrow window. The sight of her daughter, still motionless, made her heart ache. But then she noticed something new. The pale light seemed to touch Aurora's face differently that morning. It wasn't just brightness, it was warmth. Helen entered and placed the small bundle on the chair beside the bed. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly. "Your son is doing so well. He's breathing on his own now. They say he smiles when the nurses talk to him." Her voice trembled slightly. "He looks so much like you." Dr. Mara turned to her. "The improvement started early this morning. Blood pressure is holding. Reflexes are stronger. She's still unconscious, but..." Her voice trailed off, careful not to give false hope. Helen's hand found her daughter's fingers, brushing against the familiar hospital bracelet. She closed her eyes. "She always did things her own way," Helen said quietly. "Even coming back to us." The sound of a baby crying echoed faintly from the hallway. It was distant but clear enough to reach the room. Helen's head turned toward the door, her breath catching. "Doctor," Mara froze, her eyes on the monitor. The heart rate line jumped slightly, a small spike that hadn't appeared in days. "Did you see that?" she whispered. The nurse by the bedside nodded quickly. It reacted to the sound. "Oh." The baby's cry came again, softer this time, carried by the air like a thread pulling between two souls. The green line on the screen fluttered, then steadied at a higher rhythm. Dr. Mara's voice was low but full of wonder. "She's responding." Helen's tears came before she could stop them. "He's calling for her," she whispered. "He knows she's here." Mara moved closer to the bed, her tone calm but urgent. "Aurora, if you can hear me, it's morning. Your son is waiting for you." The room seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with stillness. Then, beneath the soft layers of white sheets, Aurora's fingers twitched. It was barely a movement, but Helen saw it. She gasped. "She moved!" The nurse leaned over the bed. "Try again, Mrs. Blake. Keep talking." Helen bent close, her tears falling onto her daughter's wrist. "Sweetheart, your baby needs you. He's strong, just like you. You've already done the hardest part. Now you come back to us." "Zo." Another faint sound came from the hall, closer now, the cry of a newborn being wheeled to the neonatal checkup room. The nurse at the doorway turned instinctively toward the sound, and the monitor jumped again. Dr. Mara pressed her hand to Aurora's arm. "Come on, open your eyes. Follow his voice." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a breath deeper than the ones before filled Aurora's lungs. Her chest rose higher, her lips parted slightly under the oxygen mask. The nurse's voice cracked. "Doctor, she's taking control of her breathing." Mara nodded quickly. "Reduce oxygen flow to half." The hiss of the machine softened. Aurora's eyelashes fluttered. A murmur escaped her throat, faint and hoarse, like the whisper of someone waking from a long, dark dream. Helen leaned closer, her heart pounding. "I'm here, darling. I'm right here." The monitors steadied again. But now the rhythm felt alive. Aurora's fingers moved once more, curling slightly against her mother's hand. The faintest color returned to her lips. Her breathing deepened, becoming her own. The nurse wiped at her eyes and smiled. "She's coming back." Dr. Mara stood still for a moment, letting out the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Welcome back, Aurora," she whispered. Helen pressed her daughter's hand to her cheek. "We've been waiting for you." Aurora's eyelids fluttered once, then again, and finally opened. The light from the window reflected in her eyes, unfocused, but alive. Her gaze shifted weakly around the room until it found her mother's face. Confusion flickered first, then recognition, then a flood of emotion too deep for words. A single tear slipped down her temple. "Mom?" The word was faint, a ghost of her usual voice. Helen nodded, her face trembling with relief. "Yes, my love, you're safe." Aurora's lips moved again. "The baby? He's here," Helen said softly. "He's waiting for you. He's perfect." Aurora tried to smile, the corners of her mouth lifting beneath the oxygen mask. Her eyes filled again, but this time it was not from pain. "Doctor?" Mara adjusted the bed slightly, raising it so Aurora could see through the window. Across the hall, through the glass of the neonatal room, a nurse carried a small bundle swaddled in white. The baby's tiny hand peeked out, waving gently in the air as if reaching for her. Aurora's breath caught. "That's him." "Yes," Mara said quietly. "He's been waiting for this." The moment stretched into silence. Helen brushed her daughter's hair back, her voice a whisper. "You did it. You both survived." Aurora looked from the baby to her mother, then down at the hospital bracelet on her wrist. She touched it lightly, tracing the engraved letters A. Blake, Maternity Ward. Her voice came barely above a breath. "If I'm alive, truth will live with me." Dr. Mara exchanged a glance with the nurse, who smiled through tears. The doctor's voice was steady, solemn. "Then we'll make sure it does." The soft cry of the newborn echoed once more, clearer this time, and Aurora closed her eyes as if absorbing it. Her hand pressed against her chest, feeling her heart beating strong beneath it. Helen bent to kiss her forehead. "Rest now. You're safe." Outside the door, a camera crew passed, the faint hum of whispered voices carrying through the hall. Aurora turned her head slightly toward the sound, her eyes half open. "Are they here?" she murmured. Dr. Mara nodded. "They're waiting, but only when you're ready." Aurora's gaze settled on the window where the light had grown brighter. Her breathing was steady now, full and real. "It's time," she whispered. The doctor didn't answer. She only stepped back, watching as the mother and child, separated by glass and silence, found each other through light. The monitor beeped in steady rhythm. Helen's hand stayed clasped over her daughter's. The morning sun bathed the room in gold as if blessing the moment. Aurora's eyes remained open, fixed on the tiny shape beyond the glass. The scene held still, poised between exhaustion and rebirth, between the ache of what was lost and the strength of what remained. And in that stillness, the quiet hum of the hospital filled every space, waiting for what would come next. The press hall of St. Helena Hospital was filled to capacity long before the doors opened. The sound of voices echoed against the glass walls, a low hum of tension that vibrated beneath the sterile lights. Cameramen adjusted tripods. Microphones lined the long table at the front of the room. The hospital logo gleamed on the wall behind the podium, but no one looked at it. They were waiting for the woman in the picture, the one whose silence had lasted too long. "Doctor?" Mara Quinn stood near the curtain, flipping through a thin folder. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. Everything had been reviewed twice. The video file, the timestamps, the signatures of verification. Nothing would be left to question. Beside her, Linda Frost clutched the small silver USB drive that had become heavier with every passing day. Her palms were damp, but her expression was calm. "You're ready?" Mara asked. Linda nodded once. For her, yes. A soft murmur swept through the crowd as the door opened. Aurora Blake entered slowly, supported by her mother on one side and Dr. Quinn on the other. She wore a plain ivory dress that brushed against her knees, the hospital band still faintly visible around her wrist. The room fell into silence. The clicking of cameras began and then stopped, as if even the press understood that something sacred was unfolding. Aurora moved carefully to the table, her posture steady, though her frame was still fragile. When she sat down, the flash of bulbs started again. Rachel Keene, seated in the front row, lifted her recorder. Her article draft was already titled, "The Day Truth Spoke Back." She watched as Dr. Quinn approached the microphone. The doctor's voice carried easily. "We have called this conference to clarify the events of the evening of June 14 at St. Helena Hospital. There has been speculation, there has been silence. Today, there will be evidence. The lights dimmed slightly as a screen descended behind them. The room waited in absolute stillness. Mara gave a small nod to Linda, who connected the USB drive to the projector. The first frame appeared, a static image of a hospital hallway bathed in fluorescent light. No sound, only the hum of the projector. Then, movement. A man in a dark suit, a woman in red, a nurse pushing a gurney. The man's arm wrapped around the other woman as the pregnant patient's hand reached out, trembling, before her body went limp. Gasps filled the room. Someone in the back whispered, "It's real." The clip lasted only 18 seconds. When it ended, the screen froze on the image of Aurora collapsing. The camera's red light blinked faintly in the corner of the frame. Dr. Quinn's voice broke the silence. "This recording is original hospital security footage. It was recovered before the data purge requested by corporate counsel. Chain of custody has been verified by the hospital board and legal counsel present here today." She looked directly at the reporters. "What you have seen is not an edited fabrication, it is fact." The noise that followed was immediate. Reporters shouted over one another. Flashes exploded. "Doctor, are you accusing Damien Rook of misconduct? Was this video suppressed intentionally? Has the hospital received threats?" "Doctor?" Quinn raised a hand. "All questions will be answered after Mrs. Blake has spoken." Aurora looked up then. Her eyes were steady, her voice soft but unshaken when she leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you for coming." The crowd quieted instantly. "I have been told that I should stay silent, that it's better for the family, better for the child. But silence only protects the ones who cause the pain, never the ones who live with it. Len." She paused, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the table. "I don't need sympathy. I'm not here to relive what happened. I'm here to remind people what truth looks like when no one can hide from it." Her gaze moved across the room, meeting every camera lens. That camera didn't lie. It saw everything that night. The betrayal, the fall, the indifference. And still, the world called it rumor. "I was unconscious when that video was recorded, but when I woke up, I realized the world saw what I couldn't, and for once, the world didn't look away." Helen Blake placed a steadying hand on her daughter's shoulder. Aurora continued, her tone gaining quiet strength. "This isn't revenge. It's protection. For every woman who has been told to endure humiliation in silence, for every patient who trusts the wrong face beside her hospital bed." The flashes slowed. The crowd listened. Some reporters lowered their cameras. The silence was heavier now, almost reverent. Rachel Keene felt the back of her throat tighten as she typed the words in her notes. "I don't want revenge. I want truth to protect the next woman like me." Aurora took a slow breath. "I forgave him already. Forgiveness isn't about freeing him. It's about freeing myself." The weight in her voice seemed to fill the room. "My son was born in chaos, but he breathed anyway. That's what truth does. It breathes even when everything tries to suffocate it." Dr. Quinn stepped forward and placed the hospital's verification letter beside the microphone. "This documentation confirms the integrity of the footage and of all medical records from that night." Her words were measured, final. "The hospital stands by this testimony." The flashes started again, but now the tone was different. Not the frantic chase for scandal, but the capturing of history. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching in haste. The hum of voices grew as questions poured out. "Doctor, has Mr. Rook been notified? Mrs. Blake, do you plan to file charges? Is your son aware of the public support he's received?" The moderator tried to regain order, but the room had erupted into noise. Aurora remained still, her hand resting over the thin silver bracelet she wore. She glanced toward the side of the stage where Linda stood, still clutching the now empty USB drive. Their eyes met. Aurora gave a faint nod of gratitude. Linda's expression trembled into a small, proud smile. Rachel Keene rose slightly from her seat, calling out over the noise. "Mrs. Blake, one last question. What do you want the world to take from this moment?" Aurora turned toward her, her face illuminated by the light of dozens of cameras. Her answer came quietly but carried through the room. "That dignity is not a privilege, it's a right." The words landed with the weight of truth. Even the clicking stopped for a heartbeat. Somewhere in the crowd, a flash went off, capturing the image of Aurora with her head lifted, eyes clear, her mother's hand still resting on her shoulder. Behind her, The frozen image on the screen remained. The moment of collapse turned into proof of survival. In the back of the room, near the last row of chairs, Damien Rook sat half-hidden beneath the brim of a dark cap. No one noticed him at first. His hands were clenched on his knees, the knuckles pale. The footage had been undeniable. The voice, the calm conviction, all of it stripped him bare before the world. The light from the screen flickered across his face, harsh and cold. He lowered his head, unable to look at her, as the room erupted again in noise and flash. Outside, through the tall glass windows, the afternoon light poured in, warm and relentless. The world had finally seen the hug. The world had seen the truth. And for a long moment, before the questions resumed and the cameras began their endless recording, no one in that room dared to breathe. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air vents and the soft shuffle of papers. Morning light streamed through tall windows, striking the polished wood in pale gold. The seal of the state hung behind the bench, unmoving, solemn. Rows of journalists filled the back seats, their pens poised, their cameras lowered out of respect for the rule forbidding flashes during proceedings. The case that had consumed headlines for months had finally reached its reckoning. Judge Elias Monroe entered, robes flowing, expression grave but calm. The bailiff's voice carried across the room. All rise. Everyone stood. Damien Rook lifted his head, jaw set, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. His suit was immaculate, but his face betrayed the exhaustion of a man who had already lost too much. Across the aisle sat Aurora Blake, composed, pale, her mother beside her. In her lap rested a folded handkerchief. The bracelet from the hospital glinted faintly on her wrist, the engraved letters catching the light. "Be seated," the judge said. The scrape of chairs echoed through the stillness. At the prosecution table, Attorney Nolan Hart stood and adjusted his tie. His voice was clear and steady when he began. "Your Honor, members of the court, today we present a simple truth. Power does not exempt one from accountability. Neglect is not erased by wealth, and cruelty cannot be disguised as misunderstanding." He walked slowly toward the jury box, his words deliberate. "The evidence will show that Damien Rook abandoned his wife in a moment of life-threatening distress, engaged in behavior that directly contributed to her physical and emotional harm, and attempted to conceal this through influence and deceit." The jurors watched him intently. Some took notes, others simply listened. The courtroom screens lit up as the clerk displayed the familiar footage once more. The 18-second clip played without sound, projected in haunting silence. The same sterile hallway, the same cruel embrace, the same collapse. When it ended, the screen froze on the red light of the camera blinking in the corner. Nolan's voice lowered. That light was the only witness that could not be bribed, silenced, or shamed. It recorded not only an act, but a choice. He turned toward Damien. "Mr." Rook chose to turn away. Damien's lawyer, a tall man named Eric Hale, rose quickly. "Objection. The counsel is testifying." Judge Monroe nodded once. "Sustained. Mr. Hart, confine yourself to the evidence." Nolan inclined his head. "Of course, Your Honor." He stepped back toward the table and lifted a document. "We will submit into record the verified medical report from Street Helena Hospital, detailing Mrs. Blake's condition upon arrival, acute stress-induced collapse, loss of consciousness, emergency cesarean delivery. We will also include the testimony of Dr. Mara Quinn confirming that immediate medical intervention was required to save both mother and child." He placed the folder on the table with care, the sound echoing like a heartbeat. The evidence tells its own story. When Nolan sat down, Judge Monroe nodded to the defense. Eric Hale rose and buttoned his jacket. "Your Honor, the defense does not dispute the medical reports. We acknowledge Mrs. Blake's ordeal, but we contend that Mr. Rook's actions, though perhaps unwise, were not malicious. He was unaware of her proximity in the hallway at the time of the incident and has since expressed remorse. The law should not condemn a man for an error of perception." He gestured toward Damien, whose expression remained unreadable. "My client has already suffered the loss of his career, his reputation, and the respect of his peers. He stands before you not as a monster but as a human being who made a tragic mistake." There was a murmur from the gallery, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Nolan rose again. With the court's permission, I would like to call our first witness. Judge Monroe nodded. Proceed. The prosecution calls Dr. Mara Quinn. No. She walked to the stand with quiet composure, her white coat replaced by a dark blazer. After being sworn in, Nolan began. Dr. Quinn, were you present at St. Helena Hospital on the evening of June 14? Yes, she replied. I was the attending physician in the maternity ward. Did you observe a Mrs. Blake's condition upon arrival? I did. She was unconscious, unresponsive, and in acute distress. Her blood pressure was critically low, and fetal heart rate was declining. We initiated an emergency cesarean section immediately. And in your professional opinion, what contributed to her collapse? Dr. Quinn's gaze flicked briefly toward Damien. Severe emotional trauma. It was consistent with sudden psychological shock. The courtroom was utterly still. Nolan nodded. Thank you, doctor. He stepped aside. No further questions. The defense attorney approached. Dr. Quinn, you can't directly attribute emotional shock to one person's actions, can you? I can state that trauma has causes. In this case, the cause was visible to anyone who has seen the footage. The attorney hesitated. So you're saying... I'm saying that neglect is not measured in minutes, it's measured in consequences. The judge raised a hand. That's enough. The witness may step down. As Dr. Quinn returned to her seat, Aurora looked up briefly, their eyes meeting in silent gratitude. The next witness was Linda Frost. Her hands trembled as she took the oath, but her voice was steady when she spoke. I worked the security desk that night. I was the one who saved the footage before it was deleted. Did anyone instruct you to remove it? Nolan asked. Yes, a representative from Rook Biotech called the director that morning. They wanted all recordings erased. A ripple of shock moved through the room. The judge's eyes narrowed. Proceed carefully, counsel. Nolan nodded. Did you comply with that request? No. I copied the footage onto a secure drive and gave it to Dr. Quinn. I believed Mrs. Blake had the right to know what happened to her. Why? Linda's eyes filled, but her voice didn't break. Because truth should never need permission to exist. A hush followed her words. Even the reporters stopped writing for a moment. When the testimonies ended, Judge Monroe leaned forward. Both sides have been heard. The evidence is clear. We will now render judgment. He turned his gaze toward Damien, who sat rigid, hands clasped together. Mr. Rook, this court finds you guilty of emotional cruelty and willful neglect, resulting in psychological and physical harm. The sentence includes forfeiture of custodial rights and financial restitution to Mrs. Blake. You are further removed from all corporate leadership positions effective immediately. A collective breath filled the room. Damien's face drained of color. He looked down at his trembling hands. The gavel struck once. Court adjourned. Reporters erupted as the bailiff called for order. Cameras flashed, ignored by the judge who rose and exited without a word. Damien stood slowly, unsteady, while security approached to escort him. Through the noise, Aurora remained seated, still and calm, her hand over her bracelet. The gold light from the window framed her face. As he was led past her table, Damien hesitated, his eyes flicking toward her for a brief second. She did not look at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on the empty chair where Dr. Quinn had testified moments earlier. The noise of voices swelled around them. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters shouting questions. Do you feel justice was served? Will you appeal the verdict? Mrs. Blake, how do you feel right now? Aurora stepped into the sunlight, her mother beside her. She didn't speak. She simply lifted her face toward the light, eyes closed for a moment, as if listening to something only she could hear. The cameras captured it, the image of a woman who had once fallen in silence, now standing in peace. The crowd's noise blurred into a single sound, the echo of applause mixed with the wind, and above it all, the courthouse bell struck once, its clear tone carrying across the city, marking the end of a story that had finally found its voice. The morning was quiet. The city, still recovering from the echo of the trial, seemed gentler than before. The clouds parted slowly, letting sunlight spill over the rooftops like a slow promise. The St. Helena district, once haunted by flashing lights and reporters' shouts, now breathed in silence. The courthouse bell no longer tolled with urgency. It simply marked time, calm and steady. At the edge of the hill stood the Blake residence, its gates opened for the first time in months. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of lilacs and warm bread. The world outside might have seen a scandal, but here, there was only peace. Aurora Blake stood by the tall window overlooking the garden, her hand resting on the crib beside her. Baby Theo slept soundly, his small chest rising and falling beneath a soft blue blanket. Sunlight touched his tiny fingers. They curled instinctively around the edge of the fabric, the way they once did around his mother's finger in the hospital. Helen entered quietly, carrying a tray of tea. "He's been sleeping longer," she whispered. Aurora smiled faintly. "He's learning that the world is safe again." The two women sat in the soft light. The house had changed. The heavy portraits of corporate galas and formal smiles were gone, replaced by photographs of the garden, of laughter, of life. In the center of the mantel stood a single frame, the first picture taken after Aurora's recovery. She held Theo in her arms, his eyes wide open, both of them bathed in morning light. Helen poured the tea, her hands steady now. "I spoke with Dr. Quinn," she said. "The hospital is naming a new scholarship after you, for mothers who survive trauma during childbirth." Aurora looked down at her cup. "It shouldn't have to exist, but I'm grateful it does." She smiled gently. Mara always believed pain should build something better. Outside, the garden shimmered with dew. Reporters still called occasionally, though most stories had already moved on to new tragedies. The world was always hungry for noise, but Aurora had chosen quiet. Her days began with Theo's laughter and ended with his breathing beside her. She had learned that peace was not silence, it was the absence of fear. A knock sounded at the door. Helen stood, glancing toward the hallway. "I'll see who it is." She disappeared for a moment, and when she returned, a familiar voice followed. Rachel Keene stepped into the living room, her notebook closed in her hand. "I hope I'm not intruding." Aurora smiled and gestured for her to sit. "You're not. You told the story when no one else would." Rachel sat across from her, her tone softer than the brisk confidence she usually carried. "People still write to me about you, about the conference, about that last sentence you said." Aurora tilted her head. "That dignity is not a privilege?" Rachel nodded. "It's become a headline people quote without even remembering where it came from. It's strange, isn't it? The world remembers words better than wounds." Aurora looked out the window. Maybe that's how healing starts, when words matter more than pain. Rachel hesitated before speaking again. Rook Biotech filed for bankruptcy last week. The board disbanded. Damien's assets are frozen. No one's seen him since the verdict. Aurora's gaze didn't change. "He'll find his own silence. End of free." Rachel studied her face for a moment. "You're not angry?" Aurora shook her head slowly. "Anger is heavy. I carried enough weight already." The reporter closed her notebook, understanding that there would be no more story to write. This wasn't news anymore. It was life. "Thank you," she said quietly. After Rachel left, the house grew still again. Helen took the teacups to the kitchen. Aurora remained by the window, her hand resting gently on Theo's crib. The baby stirred and opened his eyes, gazing up at her with soft curiosity. "Good morning, my little miracle," she whispered. "You don't know how hard the world fought for you." She lifted him into her arms. His warmth against her chest filled the space where fear used to live. She walked slowly through the hallway, past the open doors and framed photographs. At the end of the corridor was the nursery she had prepared before everything fell apart. The walls were painted pale blue. The mobile above the crib spun lazily in the morning air, playing a quiet melody. She stood there for a long time, listening to the sound. From the window, she could see the city stretching out below, alive and unbroken. The courthouse dome shimmered faintly in the distance. For the first time, the sight didn't make her heart tighten. It made her breathe easier. Justice had not restored what was lost, but it had given her something new. The certainty that truth, once spoken, could not be buried again. She set Theo down gently in his crib, brushing a curl of hair from his forehead. He cooed softly, his tiny mouth curving into what almost looked like a smile. "You'll grow up strong," she said quietly. Not because of what happened, but because of what survived. Downstairs, Helen turned on the radio. The voice of a newscaster filled the air. In today's headlines, the Street Helena Foundation announced the launch of the Aurora Initiative, a program supporting mothers facing trauma and postpartum recovery. The fund was established with donations from citizens inspired by the viral footage of Mrs. Blake's story. The foundation's statement reads, "From one woman's pain came a movement for protection." The sound reached the nursery. Aurora listened from upstairs, her expression softening. She looked at Theo and smiled. "You see, little one, the world can still be kind." Outside, the garden gate creaked open. Dr. Mara Quinn appeared, holding a bouquet of white lilies. Helen met her at the steps. "She's upstairs," Helen said. Mara smiled and followed the faint laughter of the baby. When she reached the doorway, Aurora turned, her eyes bright. "You made it. You made it." "I couldn't stay away," Mara replied. She placed the flowers on the dresser beside the crib. "He looks stronger." "He is," Aurora said. "He carries everything that tried to break us and turned it into breath." Mara nodded, her eyes misting. "You both do." They stood in silence for a moment, the soft melody of the mobile turning above them. Outside, the wind moved through the lilacs, scattering petals across the lawn. Aurora reached out and touched the petals that drifted through the open window. One landed on Theo's blanket, pale and perfect. She smiled, the gesture small but certain. "Every ending should look like this," she said softly. "Quiet, but alive." Mara looked at her, hearing the unspoken strength beneath the words. "You're finally free." Aurora turned her gaze toward the horizon where sunlight met the city's edge. "Freedom isn't leaving the past behind," she said. "It's being able to look at it without fear." The baby stirred again, a tiny sound that filled the room with life. Helen's footsteps approached from the hall. The three women stood together for a moment, watching the morning unfold. The world outside continued, unaware that somewhere on this quiet hill, a story that once broke hearts had finally found peace. Aurora leaned down, kissed her son's forehead, and whispered, "We're home." The last light of morning spilled across the floor, golden and complete, touching every corner of the room until nothing remained but warmth and silence.